It started like any other Saturday morning. I had grown used to the rhythm of weekends, waking up early, enjoying a cup of coffee, and doing the yard work. It was a routine I had followed for years. The sun was still low in the sky, and the lawn needed a trim. There was nothing unusual about it. Life had a sense of monotony, but in the safety of that routine, there was comfort. I grabbed my phone, checking it briefly as I watered the grass. That's when I saw it. The post on Facebook that would change everything. It was a picture of my wife, Rachel, standing with her so-called work husband, Jake. They were at a corporate event together, laughing, sharing drinks. His arm was wrapped around her waist in a way that felt far too intimate for a workplace relationship. But it wasn't just the pose that caught my attention, it was the caption, "My real partner," followed by the hashtag #officegoals. I stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of it. The first wave of emotion that hit me was disbelief. This was a joke, right? Maybe Rachel had been drinking and Jake had just put his arm around her casually. Surely it couldn't be what it looked like. But no, the more I looked at it, the more it felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some innocent post. This was her declaring Jake her real partner in front of everyone, friends, colleagues, and now me. I didn't react immediately. No texts, no phone calls, no confrontations. I simply turned off the phone, walked inside, and made myself a fresh cup of coffee. The house felt like a stranger's home. Rachel and I had been together for 12 years. We had a house in the suburbs, a beautiful house that we built from scratch, a life we had carefully crafted over the years. We had 2 kids, Lucas and Sophie, who were the light of our lives. Everything seemed perfect, but perfection was just a facade. I had seen the signs before. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, her growing distance. It wasn't just a phase, and I wasn't being paranoid. I had caught her whispering to Jake one evening, talking about how they would be so perfect together if only he wasn't married. I had brushed it off then, but that moment stayed with me. This post, however, was undeniable. It wasn't just a slip-up, it was her way of rubbing it in my face. She had taken that first step, and now it was time for me to take mine. I walked into the living room, where Rachel was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. The kids were at a friend's house for the day. It was the perfect opportunity to confront her. But instead of raising my voice or yelling, I decided to do what I knew best. I had been preparing for this moment for months. I quietly walked to my office, pulled out the folder I had been collecting evidence in, and slid it across the table. The folder was full of documents, emails, financial statements, texts, even photos that told a different story. The truth I had been waiting for. I turned to her and said calmly, "Congratulations, Rachel. The divorce papers are on the kitchen table." She blinked at me as if she hadn't heard me correctly. What are you talking about?" she stammered, clearly thrown off by my calm demeanor. "Check the table. It's all there," I said, my voice steady. I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked back to the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. Outside, the sprinklers hissed, and the birds continued to chirp. But inside, nothing would ever be the same. The photo hit me harder than a punch. No warning, no wind-up, just a casual scroll on a quiet Saturday morning. I was still in my robe, watering the damn lawn like every other weekend for the last 27 years. The sun was barely up. The coffee machine was hissing behind me. For a moment, everything felt normal, routine, safe. Then my phone buzzed. It was Alice. Well, not directly. Just a Facebook post, a photo. She was in Dallas at a sales conference. Supposedly, in the picture, she and Bryce, the golden retriever of her office, all teeth and zero spine, were standing side by side. Bryce had one arm wrapped around her shoulder, the other holding 2 drinks. Her head was tilted toward him like they were posing for an engagement shoot. Her hand on his chest. The caption, "My real partner, #workhusband for life." 2 hearts, 57 likes, 16 comments, all nauseating. Love you too. Office goals. Finally, just say it already. I stared at it. For the first time, I reread it, and I actually laughed. That kind of dry, breathless laugh that dies in your throat halfway through, like your body knows better than to waste the oxygen. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I walked into the house, poured myself the rest of the coffee, opened the kitchen drawer, and pulled out the beige folder I had prepped 3 weeks ago. Not in anticipation, no. I still had some dignity left back then. But after overhearing her giggle on speakerphone with Bryce late one night in the guest bathroom, whispering something about, "If only you weren't married," I started keeping receipts. Emotional ones at first, then legal ones. The folder had everything: petition, disclosures, property division sheet. My lawyer called it clean and aggressive. I slid it across the table like a dealer throwing down the final card. Then I opened Facebook. Her post was still up. Of course, it was. I typed, "Congratulations, the divorce papers are on the kitchen table." I posted it, logged out, and walked outside to continue watering the grass. The sprinkler hissed like nothing had changed, but the moment tasted different, like burnt coffee and pennies. Inside, I could hear the silence breathing. It had already started. She called that night, like clockwork, just as I knew she would, probably after one of her friends texted her. Alice, check your Facebook." Her voice was too cheerful, that plastic, fake upbeat tone she uses when she's trying to sound innocent, but knows the gun's already smoking. "Hey babe," she dragged the word out like syrup. "I saw your little comment. You're not actually mad, are you? It was a joke. Everyone at the office does that, you know. It's like a running thing, work husband, work wife, just for laughs." I didn't interrupt. I didn't say anything. I let her do her little dance, filling the silence with nervous giggles and justifications. It's amazing how much rope people will give you when they don't realize they're hanging themselves. "You seriously took it the wrong way," she kept going. "It's just Bryce. You know how he is. He's harmless. God, you're being dramatic." When she finally paused to inhale, I said 3 words. "Check the kitchen." Dead silence for 2 seconds, then laughter. "Oh my God, you're joking. You're joking, right? You didn't actually—" I didn't reply. She kept laughing, but now it was thinner, with a wavering edge behind it. "You're such a dork sometimes." She tried again. "Seriously, this is overreacting. It's a dumb caption. I didn't mean anything by it." Sure. Just like she didn't mean anything when I overheard her call Bryce at 11:37 p.m. on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago, whispering from the laundry room like a teenager sneaking a call. "You look so good today in that gray shirt." Stop it, I was blushing all through that meeting. Imagine if we didn't have to sneak around. Yeah, real jokey stuff. That was the night I called Marcus. My lawyer set things in motion, told me, "We're not quite at the iceberg yet, but I can see it on the radar." He told me, "Start gathering quietly. Emails, finance records, insurance forms. When it hits, move fast. Don't engage." So now, I wasn't engaging. I was executing. Alice thought it was a bluff. She always assumed my silence meant passivity, that the absence of yelling meant surrender. But no, some people prepare in silence, and when they strike, it's already done. I ended the call by saying, "Take care, Alice." Click. I imagined her staring at the kitchen table, blinking at the beige folder, the legal seal, the absence of anything resembling a warning, just the facts, just like her caption. The next morning, I woke up to a familiar silence that had settled in our house. It wasn't peaceful. It was more like the calm before a storm, the kind you feel deep in your bones. I made myself some coffee, my hands shaking just slightly as I poured the hot liquid into the cup. My phone buzzed, but I didn't need to check it. I already knew what was coming. Alice would be calling soon, full of excuses, full of panic, trying to explain her way out of this. But I was done with her explanations. I was done with the lies. As I sipped the coffee, I went over everything in my head one more time. The years we'd spent together, the years I'd given her, had they all been a lie? Was I just another fool, played by a woman who had no loyalty, no respect for me? I had always thought that we had something special, that she loved me as much as I loved her. But the more I looked at that photo, the more I realized how wrong I had been. I had always been the one who worked hard, the one who provided for us, who built our life together. Alice had her career, yes, but I had been the one holding everything up. When I built the house, when I worked long hours, when I sacrificed my time and energy, it was for us, for our family. But she had taken all of that and thrown it away, without a second thought. She had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and now she thought she could just erase it all with a little smile and a couple of hashtags. I could feel the anger rising inside me, but I wasn't going to let it consume me. I had a plan, and I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Alice had underestimated me. She thought I was just some passive husband, someone who wouldn't fight back, someone who would let her walk all over me. But I wasn't that man anymore. I was done being her doormat, and now it was time to make her pay. The phone rang, and I saw her name flash across the screen. I hesitated for a second before answering. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice calm, almost indifferent. "Troy, baby, you've got to be kidding me. You're seriously going to overreact about this, aren't you?" Alice's voice was high-pitched, filled with fake cheerfulness, but I could hear the edge of panic behind it. She knew she was in trouble. "It's just Bryce. It was a joke, I swear. You know how we joke around at the office. It's nothing, seriously." I let her continue, not interrupting her. She sounded desperate now, trying to make it seem like everything was okay, trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. I didn't buy it. I hadn't bought it for a long time. "Check the kitchen," I said flatly, the words cutting through her desperate explanations like a knife. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by a nervous laugh. Wait, you're kidding, right?" she stammered, the cheerfulness completely gone from her voice. I didn't respond, just waited, letting the silence hang in the air. I didn't need to say anything else. The message had been sent. The deal had been done. "I'll call you when I'm home," Alice finally said, her voice now small, defeated. "We can talk about this, all right?" I didn't answer. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was over. She thought she could get away with it, but now the tables had turned. Now she was going to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong person. A few hours later, the phone rang again. It was Marcus, my lawyer. I'd spoken to him earlier, given him all the details of Alice's little Facebook post, the messages, the lies. He was ready. We both knew how this was going to go down. "I'm in," Marcus said when I picked up. "I've got everything in place. It's time." I didn't even need to say anything. I just nodded, even though he couldn't see me. We both knew what this meant. I had the legal documents, the proof. I had the receipts. And now, it was time for Alice to face the consequences of her actions. By the time I finished up my work for the day, I was already preparing for what was coming next. I knew Alice would try to call, try to fix things, but I wasn't going to let her. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to back down. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, I sat on the porch, sipping my drink, watching the world go by. It was peaceful now, but the storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. And then, as expected, Alice walked in, looking like she was walking into a battle zone. She had that look in her eyes, the one she always got when she thought she could still charm her way out of a mess. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "This is overreacting. You can't just ruin my life like this." I didn't answer her at first. I just looked at her, watching her squirm. She had no idea what was coming. "This is what happens when you take everything for granted," I finally said, my voice cold. "You think you can just lie and cheat, and I won't do anything? Well, you're wrong." Her eyes widened, and she looked around the house as if she was searching for some way to undo everything she had done. But it was too late. There was nothing left for her to fix. "You think this is the end?" she asked, her voice filled with defiance, but I could see the fear behind her eyes. "You can't do this to me, Troy. I'll fight you in court. I'll make sure you don't get anything." I smiled coldly. "You don't have anything to fight with. I have everything. And now you'll see what happens when you mess with me." As Alice stood there, still trying to process the situation, I knew one thing for sure. Everything had changed. The game was over, and now she was going to learn the hard way what it meant to cross the wrong person. It wasn't just about the marriage anymore. It was about power. It was about showing her that she couldn't take everything and get away with it, and she would learn that lesson, whether she liked it or not. The next few days felt like a blur. Alice tried calling me multiple times, each call more desperate than the last. I didn't answer. There was no point in talking to her anymore. She had made her choice, and now she would face the consequences. I had seen the signs. I had seen the way she had distanced herself from me, how she had pulled away, both emotionally and physically. I had heard her late-night conversations, the whispers to Bryce that left a pit in my stomach, but I had ignored it. I had thought it was just a phase, just a temporary lapse in her focus. I was wrong. She wasn't just bored or temporarily distracted. She had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. And now she thought she could just apologize and make everything go back to the way it was. She thought I would just forgive her, let her off the hook like I always did. But I wasn't the same person anymore. The text messages had been the tipping point. The things I had heard her say to Bryce, things she never should have said, had torn through whatever illusion I had left of our marriage. That's when I decided to take action. I wasn't going to be the fool who just stood by and let her ruin everything we had built. I was going to fight back, and I was going to do it in a way that she wouldn't see coming. Alice finally showed up at the house one evening, looking more like a stranger than the woman I had married. She stood on the porch for a moment, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously around. She was clearly expecting something, though she didn't know exactly what. I watched her from the window, calm and collected, as she rang the doorbell. She hadn't even seen it coming. I opened the door slowly, just enough to see her face. She tried to smile, but it was forced, awkward. "Troy, please, we need to talk. I know I messed up, but you don't have to do this." "You don't have to take everything from me," she said, her voice shaking, though she tried to mask it with a hint of her old confidence, but I could see the cracks. The armor she had built around herself was breaking. I stood there for a moment, looking at her, letting the silence stretch between us. This wasn't the woman I had married, the woman I had loved. This was a stranger who had destroyed everything for the sake of her own selfish desires. "You don't get to do this, Alice," I said finally, my voice steady. "You don't get to tear apart everything we had, everything we built together, and expect me to just forgive you." Her face crumpled, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw a glimpse of real fear in her eyes. It was the same fear I had felt when I realized what she had done. "I'm sorry, Troy. I really am," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could keep everything under control, but I was wrong. I didn't want to hurt you." I shook my head. "You didn't just hurt me, Alice. You hurt us. You hurt everything we've ever worked for. And now you think a simple apology is going to fix it?" "I know it's not that simple," she said, her voice cracking. "But can't we talk about this? Can't we figure something out? Please. I don't want to lose everything. I don't want to lose you." "Lose me?" I echoed, almost laughing. "You lost me the moment you decided to sleep with Bryce. You lost me when you thought it was okay to betray me in every way possible. And now you're asking me to just forget all of that and go back to the way things were?" Alice's face was pale, and tears started to well up in her eyes. "Please, Troy, I don't want to lose you. You were the love of my life. I still love you. I don't know what I was thinking. I never meant for any of this to happen." I took a deep breath, my eyes hardening. It's too late for apologies, Alice. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. You've destroyed everything. And now, you're going to have to face the consequences. She stood there, speechless, staring at me as if waiting for some kind of miracle. But there would be no miracle. There was no turning back. That night, I sat down at my desk, my mind racing with everything that had transpired. The phone calls, the texts, the betrayal, everything came flooding back. I had been preparing for this moment for a long time, and now it was time to finish what I had started. I opened up my laptop and pulled up the document I had been working on for the past few weeks. It was everything I needed to destroy Alice's case in court. Everything I needed to make sure she didn't get away with this. I had it all. Bank records, phone records, screenshots of the conversations between Alice and Bryce, and most importantly, proof of her professional misconduct. The evidence was airtight. The divorce papers were already signed, but now it was time to make sure Alice understood that her actions had consequences. I sent the email to my lawyer, Marcus, with the subject line, "Game over." It was time to make sure Alice's lies, her manipulations, and her betrayal were exposed for the world to see. The next morning, I received a call from Marcus. "It's done," he said. "We've got everything we need. HR has already opened an investigation and her company is taking action. The rest is up to the courts. But you've got this." I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen in front of me. There was no satisfaction in it, no relief. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about survival. It was about making sure Alice didn't get away with destroying me, with destroying everything I had worked for. It was about making her understand that betrayal has consequences. The following week was a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and carefully calculated moves. Alice had no idea what was coming for her. She thought she could brush everything under the rug, but the truth had a way of coming to light, especially when you least expect it. By Wednesday, I received a call from Marcus. "The company is moving quickly," he said. "They've already started the internal review. HR's investigation into her behavior is now public within her office. People are talking. You're going to want to get ready for the fallout." I didn't answer immediately. I had spent the last few days going over the evidence, making sure everything was in place. The HR department had flagged Alice's post and started an internal audit, and the consequences of her actions were beginning to snowball. "You need to make sure everything's buttoned up," Marcus continued. "We've got the leverage we need, but you're still going to need to stay ahead of her. Alice has always been the type to play the victim, and now that things are unraveling, she might try to regain control by spinning this against you. Be prepared for her to accuse you of trying to ruin her career. But we've got everything lined up to shut that down." The anxiety in Marcus's voice wasn't lost on me, but I stayed calm. I had already anticipated the spin, the lies, the attempts to blame me. I wasn't going to give her that power anymore. It was time for her to realize that no matter how much she tried to play the victim, her actions had consequences. Alice's behavior in the following days was exactly as I expected. She reached out, her tone dripping with false sincerity. "I know I've messed up, Troy, but this is going too far. Please, let's just talk about this. You can't be serious. You can't really be doing this." I didn't respond right away. Her words felt like empty noise, as though she thought I'd listen to her apologies and undo everything she had done. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I'd heard it all before, and it always ended the same way. Empty promises, guilt-laden speeches, and then more lies. The worst part? Alice truly believed she could manipulate her way out of this. She thought her charm, her social status, and her connections would be enough to make everything go back to normal. But that's where she was wrong. I could feel the storm brewing, but this time I was prepared. I had made sure every move I had made was calculated, and Alice wouldn't see the fallout until it was too late. She would soon realize that playing with fire had its consequences. The day the HR investigation went public was the turning point. I was sitting in my office when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the company's internal network. Alice Montgomery placed on leave pending investigation into social media post and alleged workplace violations. The smile that spread across my face was fleeting but satisfying. I knew that this was just the beginning. Alice's reputation was about to take a massive hit, and the damage would be irreversible. As I read the internal memo, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. The very thing she had used to control and manipulate me, the power of her image, her career, her reputation, was now the thing that was going to destroy her. Her carefully constructed persona was crumbling piece by piece, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. That evening, Alice called again. This time, her voice was different. It wasn't filled with the usual feigned sweetness or pleading. There was an edge to it, a desperation that I hadn't heard before. "You can't just ruin everything for me, Troy," she said, her voice trembling. "You're going to destroy everything we've built. You're going to destroy my career." "Your career?" I echoed coldly. "You're talking about the career you built on lies. The one that you threw away for some cheap affair with a subordinate. How do you think it's going to look when people find out?" She fell silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was laced with anger. "You don't know what this is going to cost me, Troy. You have no idea what you're doing. I didn't want this. I just wanted a little fun, a distraction. But now you're going to ruin me. You're going to take everything from me." I didn't flinch. "You took everything from me, Alice. You took my trust, my love, and my family. You betrayed me, and now you're going to face the consequences. This is the price of your actions. You thought you could play me. You thought you could manipulate me, but you were wrong." Her voice grew more frantic. "Please, Troy, please don't do this. We can fix this. We can talk about it. I'll make things right." "I've heard it all before, Alice," I said, my tone unwavering. "I'm done. We're done." I hung up the phone without another word, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life. I wasn't going to let her pull me back into her web of lies. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. The next day, the emails started flooding in. Clients, friends, acquaintances, even people I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering their support. The news of Alice's scandal had made its way through the grapevine, and people were starting to talk. But the real damage came when the media caught wind of it. A few days after the HR memo went out, the news stations were buzzing with the story of Alice's public disgrace. The same company that had once elevated her, had once put her on a pedestal, was now distancing itself, issuing public statements and distancing themselves from her. I stayed quiet, watching as the storm raged around her. I didn't need to do anything else. Alice had already done the rest. By the time the divorce papers were finalized, Alice was a shell of the woman she used to be. The confident, poised, untouchable persona she had once projected was gone. She no longer had a career. Her social status was in ruins, and her reputation was irreparably damaged, and it was all her own doing. I stood in the courtroom, my lawyer at my side, watching as Alice sat across from me. Her eyes were red, and there was no trace of the woman who had once thought she could control everything. The judge handed down the final ruling. I received everything I had asked for, full custody of the kids, the house, and the assets. Alice, on the other hand, had nothing. She was left with only what she could carry, and even that seemed like a hollow victory. That evening, I stood on the porch of my new house, looking out at the sunset. The kids were playing in the yard, laughing and enjoying their new freedom. I felt at peace, knowing that I had done the right thing. I had lost my marriage, but I hadn't lost myself. I had stood up for what was right, and in the end, I had come out on top. And Alice, she had learned the hard way that you can't betray the people you love without paying the price. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new routine, but Alice's absence was felt in every corner of our home. The kids seemed to be adjusting better than expected, and while there were moments of sadness and confusion, there was also a sense of relief. I didn't need to worry about lies anymore, or whether I was being played. It was over. But Alice's attempt to control the narrative, her plea for forgiveness, and her desire to turn the tables on me didn't end when the court ruling was finalized. She wasn't the type to just fade into the background and accept defeat quietly. No, Alice had always been a fighter, and when her reputation was on the line, she would go to any lengths to claw her way back. I knew this. I had prepared for it. One afternoon, as I was at the office, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Marcus, my lawyer. The message was simple. She's filing an appeal. I wasn't surprised. In fact, I had expected it. Alice was far too proud to let things go without a fight. Her pride and sense of superiority were her strongest characteristics, and now that they had been shattered, she wouldn't rest until she could claim some semblance of victory. I leaned back in my chair, sighing deeply. I had thought the worst was behind me, but I realized that this wasn't over yet. Alice wasn't just fighting for the assets or the kids. She was fighting for her identity, for the control she thought she had over everything. That evening, I sat down with Marcus in his office, going over the details of Alice's appeal. The paperwork had already been submitted, and Alice was hoping to overturn the ruling, claiming that the decision had been based on emotional grounds and not a fair division of assets. But Marcus wasn't worried. "We have everything we need," he said confidently. "This appeal won't go anywhere. The evidence is clear. Her actions, the affair, the lies, everything is documented." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Alice was going to pull some kind of stunt. She had always been manipulative, and now that she was backed into a corner, I expected her to do anything to regain control. Sure enough, 2 days later, Alice called again. This time, her voice wasn't pleading, it was cold and sharp, like a blade. "You think you've won, don't you?" she asked. "You think you've gotten everything you wanted, but you don't know what's coming. I'll fight you for the kids, Troy. You think you're going to take them from me? Think again." Her words were laced with venom, and I could hear the desperation in her voice, but I wasn't scared anymore. "I don't need to fight you, Alice," I replied calmly. "You've already lost. This is over. You can't take back what you've done, no matter how hard you try." She scoffed. "You think you're in control? You're a fool. You have no idea what I'm capable of." "I do know, Alice," I said quietly, my voice unwavering. "You've shown me exactly what you're capable of, and now it's time to pay the price." There was a long pause before she spoke again. This time her voice was quieter, almost defeated. "I didn't want this," she said softly. "I didn't want to lose everything. I don't know what happened." I could feel the sincerity in her words, but I also knew it wasn't enough. The damage had already been done. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you betrayed me, Alice," I replied. "Before you decided to throw everything away for someone who never truly cared about you. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." I ended the call then, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I was done. I had given her more than enough chances, and she had squandered them all. Now, it was time to move forward, with or without her. The next few weeks passed quickly, and I found myself settling into a new rhythm. The kids were happy, and while the legal battles weren't quite over, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided by betrayal. I was someone different now, someone stronger. But Alice wasn't done yet. Her appeal was rejected, as expected, and she was forced to accept the consequences of her actions. I received a call from Marcus late one afternoon with the final confirmation. The case was closed, and the ruling stood. The day Alice's appeal was officially dismissed, I sat with the kids at the dinner table, watching them laugh and eat their dinner. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just a victory for me, It was a victory for them, too. We had survived the storm, and now we could finally move on. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Madison looked up at me with her bright, curious eyes. "Daddy, when is Mommy coming home?" she asked, her voice soft and innocent. I paused, my heart heavy with the weight of the question. "Your mom has some things to figure out, sweetheart," I said gently. "But we're going to be okay. We'll always be okay." And as I turned off the lights and closed the door, I realized something. I wasn't the man I used to be. I had been broken, yes, but now I was whole again. And with that, I knew I could face whatever came next. The story was over. Alice had lost everything, but in a way, so had I. However, I had learned something in the process. I had learned the power of resilience, the strength that comes from surviving betrayal, and the importance of standing up for what is right. As for Alice, she had underestimated me. She thought she could break me, but in the end, it was her who was broken. And while her world crumbled around her, I stood tall, knowing that I had fought for my family, and in the end, I had won. A month passed since the legal finalities had settled. I was living in a rhythm that felt more like peace than I had in years. The kids were adjusting, and so was I. It felt like I could breathe again after holding my breath for what seemed like forever. The house was quieter, more comfortable, and I was learning to cherish the moments of solitude. I had started going back to my old hobbies, things that had been forgotten in the whirlwind of our marriage. But there was always the nagging thought that Alice wasn't done yet. She never had been the type to simply accept defeat. One late evening, as I was finishing up dinner with the kids, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there stood a man in a dark suit holding an envelope. "Mr. Blackstone?" he asked, his voice businesslike, cold. "Yes," I replied, eyeing the envelope he was holding. It looked official, thick, and suspiciously familiar. "This is for you," the man said, handing it over. "I've been instructed to deliver it." I took it and glanced at the name on the envelope. It was from Alice's lawyer. My stomach dropped. Even though the legal battles seemed over, there was still one final twist waiting for me. I closed the door, feeling the weight of the envelope in my hands. The kids were playing in the living room, unaware of the storm still brewing in the background. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I ripped the envelope open. Inside were several pages of legal jargon, but the words were crystal clear. Alice was requesting a reconsideration of the custody arrangement. "Her lawyer is asking for joint custody," I muttered to myself. "What does she want? To play the victim now?" I set the papers down and rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of it. I had spent the last few months preparing for every possible outcome, but this request felt like Alice's final act of defiance. It was no longer about assets, about control, or even about her reputation. It was about trying to win back something she felt she had lost, to regain a foothold in the one thing she had no claim to anymore: the kids. The next morning, I called Marcus. My lawyer was not just a legal advisor, he had become my confidant in this battle. "Marcus, I got the papers," I said, my voice steady but my frustration clear. "Alice is trying to get joint custody. She's not done yet." Marcus's response was calm, as always. "It's a move that surprises no one. She's still trying to maintain control in some way. But you've got the upper hand. We'll handle this. You're not losing the kids, Troy." I don't care about the legal jargon. What bothers me is that after everything, after her betrayal, she still wants to control everything. I've already won. This is just her pride, her last stand. Marcus paused before responding. "Don't let her see you sweat. She's trying to get under your skin." "The paperwork she sent has no legal standing, especially since she's already lost the primary case. But let's get this addressed properly. We're not going to let her win now." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. Marcus always had a way of reassuring me when I needed it most. This wasn't over, but it was close. Alice had burned all her bridges, and the only thing left for her to do was try to salvage her reputation. She was grasping at straws. That afternoon, I sat down with the kids to talk to them about everything. They were old enough now to understand more than I realized, and I didn't want to shelter them from the reality of the situation. "Hey, you two," I began, calling them over to the table. "There's something I need to talk to you about." Madison looked up at me with those wide eyes, always the curious one. Connor, on the other hand, seemed more reserved, as if he was processing things on his own. "You know how things have been different since Mom and I separated, right?" I continued. Both kids nodded. "Well, there might be some changes coming up soon, but I want you both to know something." I paused, letting the words settle. "You're my #1 priority. No matter what happens, we're a team. We'll always be a team." Connor spoke up, his voice soft but determined. "But Dad, we want to stay with you. We don't want to go back." I felt a lump form in my throat. "I know. And I want you to know that I'll do everything I can to make sure you're both safe, happy, and where you belong." The next few days were filled with a sense of anticipation. I prepared myself for the final confrontation, knowing that Alice wouldn't go down without a fight. The kids were handling it better than I expected, but I still saw the worry in their eyes. They were old enough to understand that their mother's actions had consequences, even if they didn't fully grasp the weight of those consequences. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, the doorbell rang again. This time, I wasn't surprised to see Alice standing on the other side. "Are you going to let me in, or should I stand out here all night?" she asked, her tone biting, but there was something almost defeated about it. I didn't respond right away. I had already made it clear to her that she wasn't welcome in the house, but this time, I wasn't going to let her get under my skin. I stepped aside and let her in, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a warm welcome. "Just so we're clear," I said, my voice steady. "I don't want you here. I don't want to talk to you. I've moved on." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" I looked her in the eyes, cold and unflinching. "Yes, I do." She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't let her. "You don't get to destroy my life anymore," I said, each word deliberate and firm. "And you don't get to play the victim anymore. You had your chance, Alice, and you lost." The story was nearing its end. Alice had lost everything she had tried to hold on to. Her reputation was in tatters, her career was over, and now her family, the one thing she had left, was slipping from her grasp. As for me, I had regained control. I had fought for my kids, fought for my dignity, and in the end, I had won. The house was silent, but this time it was the kind of silence that came with peace, not defeat. It was a silence I could live with. The next few days felt like the calm before the storm. I could sense that Alice was scrambling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened, but the longer she delayed, the more irreversible things became. The truth was, she was losing everything: her career, her reputation, and even her own children. I had watched her break down in front of me countless times during our marriage, but I could see now she had no tears left. All that remained was a hollow shell of the woman she used to be. I had not contacted her since the day she tried to come back to the house, and I had no intention of doing so. The silence was mine to control now. I didn't need her approval or her words. She had made her decisions, and now she would face the consequences of them. The kids were doing well. Madison and Connor were settling into their new routine, and despite everything, I was proud of how strong they were. They had shown resilience that even Alice would never have anticipated. As much as she tried to manipulate the situation, they saw through it. It made me realize just how much she had underestimated them, and me. The email from HR was the final nail in Alice's professional coffin. She thought she could keep up her facade, pretend like nothing had happened, but her actions spoke for themselves. She was done. The resignation letter arrived the next day, the one that officially ended her career at the company. I had never wanted to destroy her life, but I had always known that in order to protect myself and the kids, I would have to take decisive action. That's exactly what I did. But as the days went on, the anger I had once felt began to dissipate. What remained was a sense of finality. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And so were the kids. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room with them, playing a game of cards, I felt a slight unease in the air. The doorbell rang, and I wasn't sure what to expect this time. My stomach twisted as I walked over to the door. I opened it, and there she was, Alice. She looked different. There was no confidence in her posture, no smugness in her eyes. For the first time, she looked vulnerable. "I want to talk," she said, her voice quiet, unsure. I didn't know how to respond at first. I had no intention of having another conversation with her. Everything had already been said, everything had already been done. She had made her choice, and now she was facing the fallout. "I don't have anything left to say," I replied, my voice steady. "It's over, Alice. It has been for a long time." But she pressed on, stepping closer as if trying to bridge the gap between us. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you." The sincerity in her voice almost made me feel something. Almost. But the damage had already been done. "No, Alice," I said, holding up a hand to stop her. "You didn't just hurt me. You hurt our kids. You destroyed everything. You didn't care about me. You didn't care about us. You only cared about yourself." She stood there, frozen, the words hanging in the air between us. The silence was deafening. She didn't know how to respond. "Please," she finally whispered. "Can we just start over? Can we fix this?" I looked at her one last time. For the first time, I felt pity for her. "No," I said softly. "We can't. You've already made your choice. And now, you'll have to live with it." I closed the door gently, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The conversation had been pointless. It wasn't about fixing anything. It was about her trying to reclaim control, trying to regain the life she had lost. But I had already moved on. I had learned that sometimes the best way to handle the pain and betrayal was to walk away. As I sat back down with Madison and Connor, the reality set in. Alice wasn't coming back. She wasn't going to tear us apart again. She had no power over us anymore. The kids laughed as I made a joke, the tension in the room fading. We were a family now, stronger than ever. And as for Alice, she was just a distant memory. Her betrayal, her lies, her manipulation, they no longer mattered. What mattered now was our future, a future without her. A future filled with peace, with love, and with the certainty that no one could ever take that from us again. And so we moved on, each step forward erasing the shadows of the past. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and phone calls that I didn't want to take. But through it all, something remarkable started to happen. I began to feel a sense of relief, a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. The weight of Alice's betrayal still hung in the air, but it wasn't as heavy as it once had been. It was as though the moment I had finally closed the door on her was the moment I started to reclaim my life. I spent more time with the kids, focusing on their needs, their joys, and their growing futures. For the first time in a long time, I felt like a father again, not just a husband or a victim of betrayal, but life, as it always does, kept moving forward. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table going over some final financial arrangements, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what it could be. As soon as I saw the name on the screen, I felt a flicker of curiosity. It was Alice. She had sent a simple message. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to decide what to do. There was a time when her messages would have been enough to send me spiraling into a state of confusion and uncertainty. But now, it was different. The decision was already made. The life I had built with her was gone, and there was nothing left to salvage. But for some reason, I felt compelled to respond. I typed, "What is it, Alice?" The reply came almost immediately. "I know you hate me. I know you think I destroyed everything, but I want you to know I never meant to hurt you. I was just lost. I thought everything would be different, but I see now that I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but can we at least talk?" I sat back in my chair and sighed. I could feel the years of resentment and anger bubbling up inside me, but there was also something else, something softer. Maybe it was because I had kids to think about now. Maybe it was because I realized that holding on to the anger would only keep me trapped in the past. I decided to meet her. The coffee shop where we agreed to meet was one of Alice's favorites, a small, quiet place tucked away on a corner. When I walked in, she was already sitting at a table near the window, looking like the woman I once knew, but different. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was dressed in a way that didn't scream luxury, just normal. Her shoulders were slumped, and for the first time in a long while, she looked tired. I sat down across from her. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. "I don't know why I agreed to this," I started, my voice low. "But here we are." Alice nodded. "I didn't expect you to. I know I've ruined everything. I've lost so much, Troy. My career, my family, and most of all, my self-respect. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to say it. I'm sorry. For everything." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She wasn't the same person she used to be. The woman who had walked out on me, the one who had betrayed everything we had, she was gone. In her place was someone who was broken, someone who had finally realized the true cost of her actions. "I know you're sorry, Alice," I said, my voice steady. "But sorry doesn't fix the damage. It doesn't change the fact that you chose him over us, over the family you said you wanted." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I wasn't thinking. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until it was too late." The words hung in the air, and for a moment there was only silence between us. I could see her struggling, trying to find something to hold on to, but she had nothing left. Everything she had was gone, and there was no way to fix it. "I don't know where we go from here," Alice said softly. "I don't know what I expect. But I wanted you to know that I see everything now. I've lost more than just you. I've lost myself." I didn't respond at first. There was nothing left to say, not really. The past was behind us, and all we had now were the fractured pieces of what could have been. Finally, I stood up. "Goodbye, Alice," I said, turning to walk away. "I hope you find what you're looking for, but it's not here." As I left the coffee shop, the weight that had once threatened to suffocate me lifted. I had let go. I had moved on. And as I walked out into the bright, cool air, I felt the first stirrings of freedom. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The weeks that followed felt strangely calm. The chaos of the divorce, the stress of the legal proceedings, and the emotional turmoil were all starting to fade into the background. I was focused on rebuilding, not just my life, but my identity. I spent more time with my kids, bonding with them in ways I hadn't in years. They were adjusting well, resilient as children often are. Their laughter, their jokes, their little moments of joy became the soundtrack of my new life. I kept busy too, filling the days with work and new projects. A part of me was still processing everything that had happened with Alice, but it was more like a distant memory now, something that had lost its power over me. I had survived. I was moving on. But, as with all things in life, things rarely go as planned. One evening, while I was cooking dinner, my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just another notification, maybe a work email or a message from a friend. But when I picked it up, I saw that it was a text from Alice. "Can we talk? There's something you need to know." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my heart skipping a beat. After everything, why was she reaching out now? I had closed that chapter. I had no desire to revisit it. Yet, something in the message made me pause. There was urgency in her words, something that suggested that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't another one of her manipulative attempts. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and replied, "What's this about?" A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again. This time, her response came in a bit more clearly. "I'm coming over. There's something you need to know, something important. It's about the divorce." I felt my pulse quicken. What else could there possibly be to say? We had gone through it all, the custody, the financial division, the betrayals. What was left to uncover? But against my better judgment, I said, "Fine. Come by." It wasn't long before she arrived at my door. When I saw her, it was clear that this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. Alice was standing there, her eyes bloodshot, her makeup a little smudged, her posture stiff and unnatural. She looked vulnerable, but also, in a way, defeated. "I didn't expect to see you again," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "What's going on?" Alice hesitated before walking in. She looked around, almost as if she were looking for something, an apology perhaps, or some form of validation. But that wasn't something I could offer her anymore. "Can I sit?" she asked softly, looking at the couch. "Sure," I replied, crossing my arms. "But this better be good, Alice. I don't have time for more of your games." She sat down, the silence between us heavy. Then, with a deep breath, Alice finally spoke. "Do you remember the day you handed me the divorce papers? The day you posted that comment on my Facebook?" I nodded slowly. "Of course I remember. You made your choice." Her voice shook as she continued. "I didn't make a choice, Troy. I was forced into it by my family, by the pressures of my career, and by Bryce." I frowned. "What are you talking about? Bryce? You were the one who cheated on me, Alice. You were the one who pushed me away." "I know," she said, tears starting to well in her eyes. "But it wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about our marriage. It was about something bigger, something I didn't even realize until everything was too late." I was confused. "What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath and finally, reluctantly, continued. "My parents, they weren't who they seemed. I've been keeping secrets from you, Troy. Big ones." I sat down across from her, the weight of her words beginning to sink in. "What secrets? What are you saying?" "I never wanted to hurt you," Alice whispered. "But when I married you, I was already bound by things I didn't understand. My family, they were involved in things, illegal things, I didn't know until later, and when I found out, I was in too deep." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Alice wasn't just talking about an affair anymore. She was talking about something far more dangerous, something that could explain everything, all the lies, all the betrayal. She continued, her voice shaky. "Bryce wasn't just some office fling. He was recruited. He was working with my family, using me to get close to you, to get close to your company." I felt a wave of nausea hit me. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a conspiracy. Alice reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. She placed it on the table between us. "Everything I've done, it was all part of their plan. And now, Troy, it's too late for me to back out." I opened the envelope, my hands trembling. Inside was a series of documents, contracts, financial statements, and worst of all, photographs of Bryce, my supposed friend, meeting with Alice's parents. This wasn't just an affair, it was corporate espionage. They had been using Alice and me as pawns in a game I never even knew existed. "You're saying Bryce was using me to take down my business? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alice nodded, tears streaming down her face. I never wanted to hurt you, Troy. But I was caught up in it. I couldn't get out. And now it's too late. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time since everything had started, I felt like I was losing control. The betrayal was so much deeper than I ever imagined. My own wife, the woman I loved, had been manipulated, just like I had. The question now was, what would I do with this information? How would I take my life back from the ashes they had created? As the weight of Alice's confession began to settle in, I realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. This wasn't just about a betrayal of trust, a love lost. No, this was a deliberate act, a plan orchestrated by people I had trusted, by the woman who had once been my everything. Alice wasn't the only one who had been playing a game. Her parents, her supposed business partner, Bryce, none of them were innocent. They had used Alice and in turn used me as pawns in their elaborate scheme. I could feel the anger start to build up, but I suppressed it. Rage wouldn't solve anything, and I knew that. I needed a plan, a clear, calculated approach to take back control. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening. I needed to understand how far this conspiracy had reached. After Alice left, I sat alone in the living room, the documents she had handed me still sitting on the coffee table. My mind raced through the implications of what I had just learned. And I couldn't just let this go. I had to act. I spent the next few days gathering all the evidence I could find. I contacted Marcus, my lawyer, and asked him to go through everything I had collected. I made sure to keep everything organized, documents, pictures, even the metadata from the photographs Alice had given me. It wasn't enough just to know. I needed proof. Proof that would not only destroy Bryce and Alice, but also expose the larger conspiracy they were a part of. As I was going through the material, I found something that made my blood run cold. In one of the contracts, there was a mention of a backdoor deal, an agreement between Alice's family and a rival company, one that I had been competing against for years. They had planned to take down my business using Alice as the inside woman. She had been the one to feed them information, to guide them through the gaps in our operations. Bryce had been the one to keep me distracted, to manipulate me into trusting him. All while they were slowly pulling the strings behind the scenes. This was far worse than I had imagined. I knew then that the next move had to be mine. I couldn't just wait for this to unfold. I had to take control of the narrative, destroy their plans before they could destroy me. I made a few calls, set a few meetings, and started putting my own pieces in place. But I had to be careful. One wrong move, one slip-up, and everything would fall apart. I contacted a private investigator, a man who owed me a favor from years ago. His name was Jack, and he was the best at what he did, tracking people, following their movements, getting the information no one else could. I knew I needed him to track Alice's movements, to confirm everything I suspected. Jack was quick, efficient, and most importantly, discreet. He didn't ask questions. He just did the job. After a few days of surveillance, Jack came back with the information I needed. Alice had been meeting with Bryce regularly, and not just at the office. They had been meeting at secluded hotels, at off-the-beaten-path cafes. Their meetings weren't just about work, as she had claimed. They were plotting against me, against everything I had worked for. That was when I knew what I had to do. It wasn't just about getting revenge on Alice anymore. It was about protecting what was mine. My business, my reputation, my future. They had all underestimated me. They thought I was just a quiet, passive guy who wouldn't fight back, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I started making my moves, slowly and methodically. I began to transfer assets, put things in motion that Alice wouldn't be able to reverse. I set up new accounts, new trusts, anything to protect what was mine. But I also made sure that Alice didn't know what I was doing. She was still in the dark, believing that she could come back, that I would somehow forgive her and everything would go back to normal. But nothing would ever go back to normal. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, calls, and preparations. Alice, on the other hand, was still caught up in her little world, posting her lovey-dovey updates on Facebook, thinking that everything would work out for her. It was almost sad to see her still pretending like nothing was wrong, but I wasn't about to let her get away with it. Not this time. One evening, I got a call from Marcus. He had some news. The HR department had launched an investigation into Alice. Apparently, someone, one of her colleagues, had tipped them off about the affair with Bryce. The fact that they had done it on company time, using company resources, had only made it worse. It was only a matter of time before things blew up for her. But that wasn't the end of it. I had my own bomb to drop. I was waiting for the perfect moment, the moment when she least expected it, the moment when she thought she had everything under control. That moment came sooner than I expected. With each step he took in this now empty house, everything seemed clearer. He was no longer the ordinary man Alice had once considered an easy target to dominate and control. Instead, he had become the one steering the ship in a game where only he knew the rules. When the doorbell rang that evening, it wasn't because of Alice's panic, but because of the results of the steps he had carefully planned. A letter had been sent from her company. It wasn't an apology or any sort of negotiation. In fact, it was the closure of her entire career. It was a confirmation of the price she had to pay. "You won't get anything from me. Everything's your fault, right?" Alice screamed as she stormed into the house, her eyes wild, voice rising. Troy stood up, calm, organized. He wasn't in a rush. He knew the time was on his side, and everything now was just a matter of handling the aftermath. He smiled slightly, his voice flat, emotionless. "I don't need anything from you. I just wanted you to understand that everything in life comes with a cost. The cost you're paying for not respecting your family, for not respecting the life we once had." Alice inhaled sharply, and for a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. She had been too proud, too sure that she could get away with it all. But Troy had been calculating, deliberate, and patient. The silence between them thickened, like the weight of what was happening was finally sinking in. She had thought she could take everything from him, destroy his life, and continue living in her bubble of success. But what she hadn't counted on was Troy's unwavering patience and ability to play the long game. Her face was drained of color. Her hands trembled, but there was no fight left in her. She had lost. Troy's response wasn't angry. He didn't need to be. Everything had been set in motion. Everything was already over for her. "I won't fight you, Alice. I don't need to." "You've already lost," he said quietly, before turning and walking past her without another word. She stood there, frozen, staring at the mess she had created. The walls she had built were now falling, and Troy had carefully ensured that they would come down without a sound. As he walked out, the sun glistened on the driveway, and for the first time in a long time, Troy felt a sense of peace. He wasn't looking for revenge. He wasn't seeking closure. What he was looking for was simple: justice, and justice had been served.